Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Sunday, May 18th, day 590 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
The IDF launched a major operation, which is self-described as seizing the territory in the Gaza Strip and holding it. We will hear what has been happening on the ground so far. We'll also learn about airstrikes on Yemen, as well as the two missiles that approached Israel, at least this morning. We'll also hear for dessert a little bit about the Eurovision Song Contest, where Yuval Rafael, Israel's candidate, secured a second place last night. All of this and more when we're back. A new round of negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal between Hamas and Israel began in Qatar over the weekend, pretty much immediately following the launch of what is called Gideon's Chariots, which is the operation bent on seizing the Gaza Strip and holding it for an undetermined amount of time. Manny, let's talk about, well, first of all, do you have any insight into the name Gideon's Chariots?
I'm actually not sure where the name came from. It seems like the army's using some random name generator for its operations. They haven't been very creative recently with the names, and I'm not sure what the exact tie-in here is to Gideon's Chariots as to why they chose that, but that's the name they went with. I don't think it's going to stick. I mean, the name for the war, I don't think anyone even remembers this. They call it Charavot Barzel, Iron Swords War, and I don't think anyone really uses that apart from officials. And even the army dropped that name at some point. So it's just the internal army operation name, really.
Okay, fair enough. Gideon's Chariots, ostensibly, I would imagine, named after the judge Gideon, though I don't believe there are chariots in Israel during his era. In any case, Manny, let's very seriously, let's talk about what's happening on the ground. It appears that just after midnight, very early Saturday morning, the operation was launched. And what does this mean, essentially? I know there's been a buildup along the Gaza Strip for basically 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And so how many forces are actually on the ground right now in Gaza?
So not much has actually changed with the amount of forces in Gaza. The army's launched, it calls it like the first stages of the operation, where they're essentially building themselves up for this moment when they do begin the very intensive phase. So right now the army says it's been carrying out very extensive airstrikes. We're seeing quite high death tolls coming out of Gaza. Of course, the numbers aren't completely verified, but definitely higher than usual. And the army says it's mobilized forces and moved into, they call it strategic areas or controlling areas. But they're not maneuvering deep into this Gaza City yet, or into Khan Yunis yet. It's mainly just capturing strategic areas and holding them for the moment. And then if and when these hostage talks, if they completely fall apart and the Israeli government instructs the army to go ahead, then it will from there push forward with the major op, and that includes sort of capturing the Gaza Strip and moving the population to the south, and the new aid distribution mechanism that's being talked about. So right now we're in the sort of preparation stage. So lots of strikes in Gaza and troops moving a little bit, but not too much.
Okay, so the airstrikes in Gaza, as you said, have apparently, or at least according to the Hamas-run health ministry, have caused a lot of damage and many casualties. We reported yesterday that the IDF was pushing towards Deir al-Balah. So there are forces on the ground, but not necessarily the major influx that we had expected at the outset of this Gideon's chariot operation.
That's correct. It's not there yet. We're still at pretty much the same number of forces in Gaza. The army is being a bit vague about it as well, but we saw Palestinian reports of troops pushing toward Deir al-Balah, probably to capture a strategic area nearby. So not in the city yet, but on the outskirts. I think it's still fair to say that this operation has been launched, but it's still the sort of preliminary stages of this big operation. It's not the sort of the climax of it yet.
Right. And as we noted, almost immediately negotiations ramped up. They never really stopped, as far as I'm aware. Our team was, I believe, still in Doha, but they ramped up. And now there's talks about no preconditions, a 2-month ceasefire, half the hostages out, the living hostages out immediately. We just don't actually know what's happening this Sunday morning at this point. So let's turn to another front of this war, and that is, of course, Yemen. And 2 ballistic missiles were launched at Israel overnight. How did they fare, Manny?
So the Air Force intercepted one of them. That we understand. They shot down one sort of as it reached Israel. That if you were awake at that time, if you were watching the Eurovision at that time, then you would be able to see this the interception up high up in the air and the shrapnel falling down. The second missile, I'm not sure. As far as I understand, the military didn't detect the second missile, which likely indicates that if the Houthis, as they say, they launched 2, it probably fell short, far, far, far from Israel, and that's not the first time that's happened. Even just in the past few weeks, when the Houthis began relaunching missiles again, about 10 of them have actually fallen short, mostly landed in the sea or in Saudi Arabia. Sometimes they're detected by the military, but they're not. The Houthis, that their success rate is pretty low. Only one of their missiles actually gone through and hit, of course, Ben Gurion Airport several weeks ago. But otherwise, they pretty much all get intercepted or they fall short.
But even the interceptions doesn't mean there's no danger, as we saw, I think it was Thursday, when some debris fell on West Bank settlement, Alon Shvut. So I'm sure this is all part of the Army's calculations and when to use these interceptors, where to use these interceptors, etc. But just to make that clear, that of course, even if it is intercepted, that doesn't mean that it just poofs and just disappears in the air. Correct, Manny?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's sort of the reason why, first of all, sirens sound in such large areas is because when the missile's intercepted at such a height, the shrapnel could spread to a relatively large area. And we've seen multiple times. I mean, we just saw now in Alon Shvut, and it was a pretty big chunk, and not to scare anyone, it's definitely enough to kill a person. We saw, I think it was a few months ago, there was a huge chunk of debris that landed on someone's house in a town near Jerusalem, and basically destroyed the whole roof of the house, and the family inside didn't even realize until the morning. But this is the reason why the Home Front Command says to remain in bomb shelters for 10 minutes after siren sound, just to wait for all the shrapnel to land, and not pose any danger to anyone. So if siren sounds, just stay in the shelter those extra few minutes. It's, I think, definitely worth it, especially with these Houthi missiles. They're really quite big, and I wouldn't even call it shrapnel. It's debris from the missile, just huge chunks of the missile that can land and cause harm and damage.
At the same time, of course, because these missiles have been coming at us since October 7th, basically 2023, there's a lot of fatigue among the Israeli public, and many Israelis don't even bother heading towards bomb shelters when the sirens sound. And on the other hand, many of the injuries that we are seeing due to these Houthi missiles are, of course, people who are scared, rightfully so, and are running and perhaps injure themselves. So it's easy to just poo-poo these Houthi missiles, but in fact, it is terrorism, and it's a daily event almost, or at least every other day. So recently, and people are really, having their lives affected by it. Now, Manny, let's turn to the strikes on Friday on Yemen. The Israel Air Force again attacked Yemen in very widespread strikes. And the question that I have, of course, is we've hit these ports so often. What is even left to hit there?
Not much, to be fair. So the Air Force struck the Hodeidah port and the Salif port, which are both, of course, on the western coast in the Houthi-controlled part of Yemen, destroyed infrastructure there. There was a third port that the military warned to evacuate, Ras Isa, but didn't target on Friday, so maybe they're leaving it for another strike another day. And the army even reiterated its evacuation warning after the strikes on Friday. The infrastructure, now that they're bombed, the army knows that the Houthis will continue to use these ports. They estimated it'll take them a month to restore the capabilities there. So it's not like it's gone. And it's kind of difficult to destroy a port because there's always ways to sort of fix it. It's not a very complicated thing, a port. But they did damage infrastructure there, which prevents very large ships from docking. So ships over 80 meters won't be able to dock there, which is quite significant because that means, the big shipments of anything, really. It's not just the Iranian weapons that the Houthis are bringing in, but Israel also wants to harm the group economically as well and not allow them to bring in anything. So this definitely is a relatively big blow to them. Speaking of, strikes that don't do that much damage and how many times can you hit it? The international airport at Sana'a, Israel targeted it less than 2 weeks ago, destroyed the terminals. In a previous strike, it destroyed the control tower. Israel bombed the runways, destroyed 6 planes, and on Saturday morning, a plane landed in the airport because it takes all of 2 hours to fix up the runway. You just, pave the road over and you can just land a plane there. You don't need the control tower. You don't need the terminal to do any of that. Of course, it's not the same airport as it was before, and the Houthis are down 6 planes, but still, there's only so much Israel can do with these strikes. It can keep bombing these ports and the airport, but the Houthis, as far as it seems to me, they're not particularly bothered by this. They're just going to keep launching missiles at Israel, and I don't think Israel's really figured out yet what will sort of hurt them enough to make them stop. And I'm not sure there is something like that because they are kind of crazy, I think, for launching missiles at Israel for so many months on end.
Right. I would agree with you. They seem completely undeterred. And so I just wonder, with my financial hat on, is it even worth it for Israel to complete these missions? Because this is a major operation. I mean, we're talking about, how many planes, and these are fighter jets, and there's refueling probably involved. How far away is Yemen? I mean, this is a lot of money every single time that we're, striking these ports that we strike again and again and again, to the extent that in Israeli culture right now, there are memes, there are jokes being made about striking these ports again and again and again. And I wonder, obviously, U.S. President Donald Trump kind of made the calculations for himself and struck a deal with the Houthis. They're not about to strike a deal with Israel, it appears to me. So I just wonder if the Air Force even makes these financial calculations. Do you have any insight, Manny?
They do, for sure. They do calculate this sort of thing. There's always munitions calculation and how much personnel you want to set to that mission if you're dealing with something else. That's why for months, Israel never dealt with the Houthis because it was busy fighting in Lebanon and in Gaza. But yeah, like you mentioned, 15 fighter jets were involved in the strike on Friday. And on top of that, there are refuelers. There's multiple refuelers, for each group of planes, each squadron of planes. There's spy planes, the reconnaissance aircraft also participating. There's also search and rescue forces on standby in case something goes wrong. It's a whole big operation. It involves lots of people and very expensive fuel-wise. It's 2,000 kilometers from Israel, farther than Iran, just to put that into perspective. Tehran's only 1,500 kilometers from Israel. So it's a huge operation and definitely costly. And what gain, I'm not sure yet. And I think the only thing that the Houthis, the only thing that's going to stop them from launching missiles at Israel, and they've said this publicly, is ending the war in Gaza. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon either. So it looks like we're going to have to sort of deal with this annoyance for as long as the war in Gaza goes on. And Israel will have to make its calculations whether or not it's worth it to keep sending planes down there to bomb the port yet again.
Okay, let's go to a short break.
Israel Bonds, the heartbeat of solidarity, the powerhouse of support. When the Israeli-Hamas war hit, Israel Bonds stood tall, proving we're more than just an investment, we're a lifeline. Israel Bonds pledges to ensure Israel thrives and flourishes. Investing in Israel Bonds isn't just a financial move, it's a declaration for resilience, strength, and a better future for Israel. Join us and let solidarity echo through generations.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. Many thanks for joining me, of course. Let's talk about a strike on Saturday into Lebanon. Of course, Israel has been basically upholding the ceasefire that was struck in November, but reserves the right to take out any kind of major operator who is planning attacks against Israel. So what was the strike that we saw yesterday?
So yet another strike, of course, on Hezbollah, and this has basically become a daily occurrence now. So another operative that Israel identified in southern Lebanon. Well, I mean, southern Lebanon's maybe a little bit unfair. It's he was targeted in a town around 30 kilometers from Israel's border, so it's relatively deep. It's not right on Israel's border. It's definitely in southern Lebanon, but not as close as one might think. And according to the army, he was responsible for Hezbollah's forces near the Beaufort Castle area, which is this castle, and there's this ridge. It's kind of close to the Manara, Kiryat Shmona sort of area, just across from that. The reason why I mention this is because about a week ago, the Air Force targeted a very significant Hezbollah site in the mountain there, this underground site. If you remember, we talked about this thing, I think on the podcast, very intensive airstrikes in that area. And the army says that this Hezbollah commander was working to restore Hezbollah's capabilities in that area. So at the site that Israel targeted, he was going to work to rebuild it or do something there to restore the capabilities. And then he was targeted in another area of southern Lebanon when he was driving on a road.
It's always fascinating to me as a bit of a history buff to see that these historic strategic locations are being repurposed. Of course, the Beaufort Fort was a strategic location for, hundreds of years. So, Manny, let's now talk about a battle of a different ilk, shall we say, and no less serious for many, many people. And I'm talking, of course, about the Eurovision Song Contest. And last night, Israel's contestant Yuval Raphael reached second place. She was first place in the popular vote, and the jury didn't quite agree with that assessment, and so she landed in second place just after, well, there was quite a spread, after Austria, just before Estonia, 1 point difference, if I'm not mistaken. So, Manny, you're quite the Eurovision buff. I don't know if our listeners know that. And I enjoy it because I'm not a fan of sports. And so once a year or so, I watch at least part of it, and it's my World Cup in a way. And so, Manny, what stood out to you as you were watching last night's Eurovision?
The performance by Yuval was great. I'll have to say that. She did a good job, I think, in my opinion. Of course, the jury, when they give their votes, they actually give it from a separate show that she does a day earlier. So it's.
I was not aware of that. Actually.
So they do a jury show where the juries do their votes then, and then the live performance, the grand final, is actually the juries have already gotten their votes together by then.
Wow, that is fascinating. And it explains actually quite a lot, because her performance, I have to say, I had chills watching it. Of course, knowing her backstory, that she was a survivor of the Nova Festival and hid for, I believe, 8 hours in a bunker under corpses and playing dead. That, of course, adds to everything. But the fact that there was a separate performance actually gives a lot of insight into the jury voting. So continue, Manny.
Yeah, so that kind of explains why you see all these discrepancies between the jury vote and the popular vote, or the public vote. You could see this with Switzerland, the host country this year. They got massive amounts of points from the jury and 0 from the public when it came to the actual final performance, which was amusing. But I was watching with a group of friends, and actually we were kind of scared that Israel would win. It really came down to the wire at the very end. And we were just actually very scared, like, oh no, we can't win, we can't host this, we're in the middle of a war.
Exactly.
And sort of, I guess, thankfully, and I think Israel's also quite thankful that we didn't win, because it's very expensive to host, and it's a whole ordeal. I remember when Israel hosted in 2019. So definitely very respectable to get second place. We did get quite, some surprising votes from some of the juries, I'll add. I think Azerbaijan gave Israel their 12 points, which was surprising. I didn't expect to see that. In Ireland.
Really? But Manny, I would
Yeah.
have to say that I was completely expecting that one because Azerbaijan, of course, their group was tossed out in the semifinal, but it was led by a mountain Jew, meaning I believe Israel had been planning to give our votes to Azerbaijan. So that
That's
did not
right.
surprise me at all.
Well, you can't exactly prepare that ahead of time before the performance, but many countries do. Of course, I think Israel gave theirs to Greece in the end, which of course is another close country. But we did get some surprising points from other juries, like Ireland gave Israel 7 points, which I think was quite interesting as well.
You know why, though, Manny? Ireland gave us points because last week Amy Spiro, who covered the Eurovision for us, said that Ireland's song was her favorite. So that's why they did that, obviously.
Okay,
because, yes.
that I didn't know. But anyway, it was a great show. I mean, I enjoyed it. It's the only thing I watch, only sport events that I watch every year as well. I don't normally watch traditional sports either. But it was definitely very interesting, sort of the voting process this year when it came down to it. Normally it's very predictable. This year, definitely not.
Right. And just to mention, of course, there were altercations. There was a protest outside of the arena before the show and during the show. At least 2 people rushed the stage. Anti-Israel protesters rushed the stage. It's unclear if Yuval Rafael actually heard them, if it affected her in any kind of way. She did just beautifully, but it was definitely a presence there. And for the first time in, I think, Eurovision history, Palestinian flags were allowed in the arena. So you could see shots. My daughter was very surprised to see a shot with an Israeli flag and just behind that a person waving a Palestinian flag. So a flag is just a flag, right? But there's a lot of tension there when it comes to Israel. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. It would have been very challenging, to say the least, had Israel won, because of course airlines are canceling their flights just from the logistics of it, not to mention that this country would probably boycott and this country would boycott. It's very respectable to reach second place, I think, this year. So I don't know if our North American listeners can even imagine how big this contest is in Israel and Europe, but it is a huge event, and I think we're all pretty happy to have it behind us, and it went pretty smoothly overall.
Yeah, and until next year.
Until next year, correct. So Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.